to introduce Daniel Pinchbeck, who will talk to you about the future of psychedelics. Daniel Pinchbeck grew up in New York in the 50s. He became a journalist. He became later an author of 2 books. One of them is now also available in German. It's called 2012, and of course it's available in English as well. The Return of Quetzalcoatl, in German, Die Rückkehr von Quetzalcoatl. Daniel is also the chief editor of a most spectacular, future-oriented website, web blog called realitysandwich.com. He also writes for Conscious Choice, and he is now presently working with a few friends in New York on a new project called Postmodern Times. And I'm very impressed about the previous work of Daniel Pinchbeck, and in the same way, I very much look forward to his future work, and I think his contributions, be it in his books, on his web blogs, and in his talks, are remarkable, and I think he is contributing a lot to what is the contents and the aim of this conference, meaning a consciousness change as a challenge for the 21st century. And I'm very grateful for Daniel Pinchbeck that he came here to Basel, to our conference, with his brilliant mind and his promising presentations. Thank you very much. Please welcome Daniel Pinchbeck.
Thank you. That was very sweet. And it was very nice of Dieter to bring me here, and also sort of through his auspices, 2012 got published by Sphinx, where he used to be, I think, a publisher. So yeah, I guess I'm going to start. I'll sort of go over some of the ground that I went through in the panorama panel, and then we'll go off in strange and unusual directions and excursions, I hope. So I mean, I sort of explained a little bit in previous talks. I've written these 2 books, Breaking Open the Head in 2012. And with Breaking Open the Head, it came out of a spiritual, existential crisis, spiritual emergency in my late 20s, that I'd come from this totally secular materialist background. So at that point, when I began to think about, well, is there anything, any other access to any other types of knowledge or forms of consciousness, I remembered my psychedelic experiences in college. So because I was a journalist, I decided to use journalism as a sneaky tool to explore the spiritual possibilities or consciousness possibilities. So I started getting assignments and managed to write about ayahuasca for the Village Voice, and ended up going to Ecuador and visiting a tribe in the Amazon, the Sequoia, and working with ayahuasca with them, and going through a Bwiti initiation in Gabon using iboga, also known as ibogaine. And I went to the Mazatec Indians in Mexico and took mushrooms. And just the more I got pulled into the subject, the more excited I got, and ended up becoming this total fascination to learn everything I could about shamanism and psychedelics and convey that in my first book. And I had these number of experiences, which are detailed in both books, that kind of shifted me out of a secular materialist worldview to kind of opening to this shamanic realms, these other dimensions of consciousness, other possibilities of how reality may be constituted. when I went through those experiences, that included like synchronicities, knowledge coming from shamans that they couldn't have accessed in ordinary ways, knowledge coming to me in visionary states, even sort of like very occult episodes where after psychedelic use, I would have like the sense of a sort of entity that had stuck around and was causing like poltergeist phenomena and so on. As a result of these crazy experiences, my belief system slowly began to shift, and I shifted from secular materialism to, as I said, accepting shamanism, and also really then feeling that I had to take more seriously indigenous knowledge and indigenous traditions. And I think that we in the West still have a tendency to see indigenous cultures as kind of myth-based and superstitious, and they don't have the kind of knowledge that we have. They don't have a science or technology or technique. And I began to realize that they did have a science and a knowledge and a technology. It's just that their concern were very different, almost like opposite aspects of being and experiencing than the Western way, the Western knowledge system. And so that led me to write 2012, because I realized that if Western rationalism, had reached this level where we'd sort of denied and suppressed this totally other form of knowing, this other way of being, this other consciousness, then we had to take seriously what these traditional and indigenous cultures say about our world and about where we might be going. And then if you look at a lot of these indigenous cultures, they possess kind of coherent understanding, coherent knowledge system about the time that we're in. So most specifically, the classical Mayan civilization, which developed in the Yucatan up until the 9th century AD in Mexico, they seem to have spent like hundreds of years sort of developing this knowledge system in their architecture that was about a date and at this time and the date of December 21st, 2012, which seems to be indicated as a kind of shift in world ages, or the end of one cycle and the beginning of the next. And if you look in the Popol Vuh, the creation myth, it kind of describes these previous world cycles and how they're these kind of cycles of creation and destruction, then creation again, rebirth. So 2012 just became this attempt to look at that concept, and also looking at it from like the Hopi Indians and different cultures, but the Hopi talk about transition from the 4th world to the 5th world, and they believe they have a set of oral prophecies that go back a very long time. Most of them have been fulfilled. There's just a few left, and that so we'll be moving from one world to another world. So what does that mean, one world to another world? And that was kind of the questions that I posed myself in 2012, and I realized that as Western people, we need to use Western techniques and Western language and models of knowing and philosophy to understand this type of process. So I looked at a lot of thinkers like Heidegger and Carl Jung, and Nietzsche became very important, and Walter Benjamin. And I also looked at quantum physics and how that's kind of changed our perception of consciousness and kind of taken us out of our presumed objectivity. So quantum physics says that there really can't be an objective observer separate from the process that they're observing, which then became sort of, as an idea, came back to haunt me in terms of the book, because I began to have kind of experiences that seemed to be part of this whole prophetic unfolding as I was writing the book. Like I began to receive prophecy transmissions and ayahuasca ceremonies and so on. So in 2012, I looked at this question from a whole bunch of different angles, and what I've been doing since that book came out in the U.S. in spring 2006 is really thinking about, okay, so if it's such a short period of time, what do we do? What's going to happen? And I guess one thing that I've been thinking about more and more lately is this question of what will happen in 2012 may just be the wrong question, and we should just be really asking, what are we going to do? Like, what can we bring about? What type of change can we bring about in this time to make the world that we would like to see? And so clearly for me that the psychedelics were at the core of this whole process for me, and so in terms of thinking about the future of psychedelics, I'm thinking about them in terms of this larger global and social transformation process potentially. And as I talked about in the panorama thing, one really neat kind of way of thinking about how this transition could happen so quickly is from this physicist Peter Russell, who's written a few books called Waking Up in Time, and he wrote a book about 2012. And so he noted how these different revolutions in sort of human civilization and culture seem to happen in exponentially faster amounts of time in terms of linear time. So if you go back to the agricultural age, that was thousands of years. Then the industrial age was hundreds of years. Then our information or knowledge age, knowledge revolution, has just been tens of years. And so each one builds on the past. It's like a pyramid structure. So you couldn't have had the industry unless there'd been that development of agriculture. And then you couldn't have had the information technology unless we had the factories that could make the iPhones and Apple laptops and so on to get out to everybody. So Peter Russell suggests that this points towards another level of transformation that could even be faster. And so what he proposes, what this next level of transformation would be from information or knowledge to wisdom. And so if the agricultural age took thousands of years, the industrial age took a few hundred years, the information or knowledge age took like tens of years, we could have wisdom in like a couple of years. Sounds kind of exciting. So and I think part of wisdom would be reckoning properly with psychedelics and shamanism and these indigenous knowledge systems, and also recognizing the kind of limits to Western science and the limits to how we've constituted Western reason. So I was talking about Georges Bataille, this French philosopher who had this essay about how if you think about the Enlightenment philosophers and who constituted this whole idea of reason, they thought about it in terms of sunlight, the light of the sun. Like the reason was like the clear light that streamed from the sun. And Bataille pointed out that was kind of funny because if you actually turn, to look at the sun, you can't see it. You go blind or you go crazy like Van Gogh. So it's almost at the core of this reason that we put so much faith in. There's a kind of aporia or kind of self-contradiction. And then if you look at a lot of kind of these traditionalist thinkers, or even people like Rudolf Steiner, the anthroposophy founder, who's got the center near here, they talk about a sort of intellectual intuition, or how intuition can be used as a form of thinking. That's something that needs to be recovered as we sort of go forward into this next phase. So I feel that psychedelics, one of the great things that psychedelics do is they reveal the limits to reason and our normal sense of objective reality, of being able to be separate as observers from this material reality that's out there. And once again, if you get into like Rudolf Steiner, he talked about this kind of stuff a lot. Like he talked about how thinking and the material world really can't be separate, because you can just to be a materialist, well, you have to still think about material, so you're already, the thought almost comes first before the material, So anyway, so then I was thinking about different aspects of the psychedelic experience and how they work kind of personally, but then how they might point toward socially the utility, the value of psychedelics in a process of social and cultural transformation. So if you think about, one aspect I think that comes out a lot is personal insights, psychological insights, healings of various sorts, a sense of being able to like move through a lot of personal material. And some of that comes from, kind of letting go, like of certain things. I mean, the mystic Gurdjieff had this really nice line where he said, if you want to make progress on the spiritual path, you have to make sacrifices, and the first thing you have to sacrifice is your suffering. So he thought that most people were very attached to their suffering, and it was almost like the last thing that they wanted to give up. We're kind of attracted to our own kind of neurotic complexes, because that's how we kind of recognize ourselves, and we keep like bouncing up against them. So that's something that we'd have to like sort of sacrifice. And I think psychedelics used properly can be a very powerful tool for that. Maybe especially Iboga of all the psychedelics. And so another aspect of the psychedelic experience is deconditioning. So that normally we're just so used to being in this social construct that is around us, that we forget how much of it is just a construct. That some human had the thought of money, or the thought that all the buildings had to be right-angle boxes, and so now we're stuck in this world of money and right-angle boxes. So psychedelics give you this deep sense that the world could be otherwise and probably should be otherwise. So I think that's a very powerful and profound insight, and might apply to how we would think about social change or transformation. And so another aspect is the visionary element in the psychedelic experience, and that you come into contact with these other dimensions, sort of other aspects or frequencies of reality, other entities that seem to communicate with you, that want to play with you or tweak you or tickle you or whatever. So, I think that's kind of like the 1,000-pound gorilla in the world of psychedelic, research in a way, because it's like, Rick Strassman wrote the book DMT, The Spirit Molecule, and he found that a lot of his subjects would have these alien entity encounters, and he just really didn't know how to deal with that, how even to, articulate it. He was trying to be a good scientist, So, and then another aspect of it would be, the kind of amping up of psychic phenomena, paranormal aspects of reality, so that a lot of people will feel like when you're in the psychedelic space that it's like super synchronistic, and even afterwards, it's almost like you carry with you for a while this kind of ambience of synchronistic flow, and new information comes in, or you can feel that you're in like telepathic connection with somebody. I've even had some like somewhat convincing experiences of like materializations, like objects appearing or disappearing, and these things can happen without psychedelics, but psychedelics seem to be amplifiers of this aspect of psychic phenomena that is pretty much totally denied and not spoken about in the scientific world. So I think that it's important to qualify and say that we're in a conference about psychedelics, especially, but psychedelics in themselves are not answers. And I think that was like one of the big mistakes of the 60s, and one of the big mistakes that Leary made was when he wrote The Psychedelic Experience. The guy had only been tripping for like 2 years, and so he wrote this book about taking the bardo of the Tibetan Book of the Dead and making a whole psychedelic trip manual out of it. And he talked about, once you've had the enlightenment experience of the psychedelic, no, it's not the case. You get these illuminations, or you get these sort of, entry points into these other forms of consciousness, but then you come back and you're not enlightened. You have to deal with that, and actually can be a little bit traumatizing or almost kind of weakening to your normal ego identity to have these kind of experiences. And I think one of the huge challenges of psychedelics is integrating that experience. I think in a way, a lot of, maybe all my work so far has been, having these psychedelic experiences and getting these visions of these other possibilities, other realities, and then coming back to this earth plane and having to like painstakingly try to integrate them in some way and apply those lessons in some meaningful way. So psychedelics are tools; they're not answers. And as tools, what's required to use them properly is a whole set of processes and practices. And those processes and practices are primarily the ones that shamanic cultures have, and which you can experience through shamans or through something like a syncretic tradition like Santo Daime, which is this Brazilian religion that uses ayahuasca. And I've been watching. I have a bunch of friends who've been involved with it in the West. And from a few years ago, when they first got involved and they were just like passive, sitting there doing these ceremonies, now they are, moving spiritual energies in a totally different way. So somebody will become like possessed by some kind of entity or spirit. They have certain ceremonies that are devoted to that kind of thing, and there will be a whole technology of gestures and actions and sounds and so on, which will help that energy to just move through, and they actually see themselves as being kind of transducing elements that allow these spirits to kind of come through this plane and get a necessary healing and then be released in a way. So, and there seems to be a vast, real technical toolkit of shamanic, principles and practices that can become part of this process, and maybe need to be. Because I was just talking the other day about how I think, if you look at all these indigenous shamanic cultures, a lot of them are very intent on the ancestors being very important. and they talk about how, you have to have respect for ancestors. Often they'll have shrines to their ancestors. But we in the modern West, generally, we don't want to deal with our ancestors at all. I mean, for the most part. I mean, maybe it's a little better in Europe. In America, I think it's very much like that, because, the ancestors were the ones who had the slaves, killed the Indians, did the whole colonialism trip, burned the witches. We don't want to think about all of that stuff. But if you actually want to get engaged with shamanic practice, you're going to have to deal with all of that, shadow material of your personal, journey. I mean, it's there, and you have to bring it up to consciousness and help it kind of be transmuted and go on. Because with all this stuff, either it's done consciously, or these things are inflicted upon us unconsciously. So in these indigenous cultures, they talk about how if you don't deal with the ancestors properly and take care to work with those spirits, they will come back and afflict you as neuroses or addiction or alcoholism or depression. Yeah, so those are some of the main aspects. Let's see what I have here. So I was thinking about, so we have this personal psychological element, and on a more social level, it's, if you think about psychedelics, let us see our patterns and our habits and our way of kind of being in ordinary reality so we can shift those patterns. And then on a more social level, we've got a culture that has tremendously bad habits, and bad patterns. And, we need to find the will to start to change those patterns just for pure survivability, so these things. I think there's, we just met in New York with this woman, Maud Barlow, who's been writing these books about water privatization and the global water crisis. And it's absolutely horrendous. And these plastic bottles are literally killing the planet. The water you're getting from these things, which I drink all the time, I'm not making myself better up here, but, if we actually want to take the types of perceptions that we get from psychedelics, which I think includes this enormous increase in sensitization to our environment, we have to deal with stuff like this, on every level, I don't know how to do it. I'm just putting it out there. So then I think looking from the psychological, and the other thing that's interesting, I think, when you do psychedelics, is that it's not, you see that it's your personal psychology is also an aspect. They kind of, intermesh Marx and Freud naturally, because you see how your personal psychology is both an outcome of these, patterns, familial, psychoanalytic patterns, infantile patterns, and also social patterns, social conditioning, how social forces and material production forces were kind of exerted upon you. And Marcuse, who's one of my favorite theorists, talked about, he wrote a book called Eros and Civilization, where his work was really about trying to integrate Marx and Freud, and he talked about how, you would feel like what he felt was like an underlying emotion or sort of unacknowledged sense in the culture was guilt over a deed not yet done, the deed of liberation, So I feel that is really weirdly true, I think. Okay, so from there's the personal psychological element and repatterning on a social level. Then there's maybe deconditioning, recognizing that the environment is a social construct. We step back from that, and we're in the realm of a design science, like Buckminster Fuller, that we could look at, all these aspects of our world as design problems that require design solutions. And so there's a lot of really great design science approaches to different areas, So I was talking in the panorama about money as being a really interesting area, that we have this money that accrues interest. Our money in itself inscribes aggressive, competitive, and sort of asocial pathological behavior patterns. If you think about when you get a loan from a bank, the bank gives you the money that you're loaning, but it doesn't create that extra money that you have to give back as you get interest, right? So then the bank checks your credit rating. What they're actually looking at is your ability to go out there and compete with all the other human beings who are in the same field to make enough money to satisfy that interest, So the whole system, in a way, forces people to compete. It creates artificial scarcity, and as its basis, basically. what this, and I've looked at it, looking at it from various angles, but there's one really interesting guy, Bernard Lettier, who wrote a book called The Future of Money. And he was a big currency trader in Belgium. He was one of the architects of the euro. And he has suggested that there could be an alternative currency that could be complementary, that would be called the Terra, that would use a negative interest or demurrage charge. So actually it would lose value as you held on to it. So you would actually be better off for you to get it into circulation as fast as possible. I think it's a really cool idea. So once again, it's like if we step back, if we use like the psychedelic insights, which show us that we're in this socially conditioned realm, then we can step back and try other things. We can use kind of a design science approach to all aspects of reality. There's somebody like William McDonough who wrote Cradle to Cradle about how we could redesign all of our industries so that it wouldn't be toxifying the biosphere. It would actually, all the feedback would be positive and non-destructive. I mean, he believes that that's possible. I'm not a chemist, I don't know, but it's certainly like there should be like a mass public interest in getting something like that to happen. Let's see. Paul Stamets, who actually admits to having been inspired by the psychedelic mushrooms, by psilocybin. He's been kind of given mushroom instruction in how to use the mushrooms for bioremediation. So he's able to leach toxins out of the soil at industrial spills and Superfund sites just using mushrooms and seeds and so on. You can get a lot of information about him online, and there's some amazing books. So there are a lot of projects like that really interest me. And then on another level would be thinking about the social system in itself. And I don't know how many people have heard of Antonio Negri and Michael Hart. Wrote this book, Multitude, which I find really fascinating. And they talk about these different, well, they were kind of like post-Marxists. So they looked at the whole Marxist analysis of material production in the 19th century. Industrial production was basically material goods. And they see that there's been a shift in the sort of form of production that's most important in our society is actually immaterial production. So material production was making like stuff, like cars and furniture and so on. Immaterial production is like software, networks, effective relationships, media. So they think that that's become the most important form of production in contemporary society rather than material production. And they think that actually points towards this huge change that's happening in human consciousness, that we've moved from the kind of factory pyramid structure to much more collaborative ways of working and interacting. And they see that has potentially positive and revolutionary kind of hope in a way. So if you look at like the history of media, whenever there's like a profound new form of media technology, it tends to lead to a different social organization, a different political system. So you never would have had the kind of dominator, patriarchal, hierarchical priest culture without written laws. You never would have had the nation state, modern democracy, without the printing press. Which disseminated enough literacy so that people could participate on some level. And now we have the internet and the social networks. So that may actually be pushing us towards a different type of global social infrastructure, which they see as potentially a kind of global direct democracy. Another really cool, I'm sorry, is this seeming like too far off the subject of psychedelics? To me, it all connects, so I don't know. But anyway, so what they see, I think this definitely connects to psychedelics. What they see as the most important form of production in a contemporary society such as ours, which is post-industrial and all that stuff, is actually the production of subjectivity. Which I think is a really amazing idea because we don't actually usually think that subjectivity is something that's produced. But once again, if you step back, and take that psychedelic perception to heart, you can see that our whole system of kind of media and education and indoctrination is all designed to kind of hold subjectivity and consciousness at like a certain frequency, a certain bandwidth, so that you create subjects who are totally obedient, compliant, who keep consuming all the stuff that the society throws at them, and so on. And so, in a way, if we want to change in this short period of time that we have to transform the planetary culture, we have to produce a different type of subjectivity. And so once again, these Web 2.0 tools and the possibility to use this technology. Like you can create some goofy video of your cat dancing or something, and 50 million people may see it next week. I mean, we're in like a totally different media situation, and it's very exciting. So okay, so there are all these different elements, and I could talk about the media more in depth. I mean, that's Reality Sandwich for me as a kind of prototype of how do you create like alternative media that's professional and glitzy enough, but still supports like consciousness transformation and shamanism and all the things that maybe we all like. I don't know. But then I think the most important question is really the underlying paradigm, And here I talked about like J.G. Bennett, this follower of Gurdjieff, talked about how, if you think about the Earth, it's like we've just woken up on this like amazing spaceship, and we're like traveling through this incredible galaxy. And the only question that we seem to bother asking is, well, how does it work? What happens if we keep tinkering it and taking it apart and trying this piece and that piece? We don't ever really ask more like integrative questions, like what is it for? Like what are we doing on this spaceship? And I think that if we look at the underlying paradigm of modern Western capitalist civilization, it's just accumulation. You get as much stuff as you can to hide your anxiety about the fact that you're going to die someday and you'll lose it all. So it doesn't seem like a very deep or meaningful paradigm to run a global civilization on. And now we've got everybody doing it. Now like Europe gave birth to America. I mean, if you look at the original American colonies, they were European corporate charters. Each little colony was, so in a way, like America is like the Frankenstein child of Europe. America went insane, I admit it, and we created this insane pop culture with this maniacal concept of material accumulation, and we disseminated all over the planet in glossy form. So now everybody's doing it. So now you have the Chinese and everybody in India wanting to have the same crap that people in the U.S. and Europe have. And we know that that's not going to be possible with the finite Earth. So if we could use these media tools, the Web 2.0 tools, to actually transform the media, then we could disseminate a different message, and I think this in a way come from Europe, but very much from America. Because America, although it's lost most of its status in the world for its incredibly horrific behavior in the last years, is somehow still like projecting the dream across planet Earth, like the American dream, the collective dream. So it's like if we could start to project a different dream, it might catch on. It might be like maybe the Chinese and Indians, they have their own like ancient sacred cultures. Like they could go back to those maybe. I don't know. I mean, all I know is we got to like stop them doing our shtick. And we have to stop ourselves doing our shtick at the same time. So yeah, so the underlying question is, well, what are we doing here? And I guess I would say that what psychedelics and Gnosticism and so on point towards is that somehow like soul evolution, spiritual development, consciousness development, is the purpose of being human, not getting a bunch of stuff, So that seems like a better paradigm, Okay, so one thing that I've gotten a few times on psychedelic trips is this idea that people have been like, my book 2012, I went into this whole concept of synchronicity, and I kind of established it a bit from, and it's interesting because in the West, like, Mark Twain at the beginning of the 20th century wrote an essay where he just listed all these really strange synchronicities he'd had, but he was sort of confounded by them. Then Carl Jung wrote an essay about synchronicity where he noted like all these experiences that would happen to him. For instance, he would have a dream of somebody firing he would have a dream of a bullet going through his head. He would wake up in the morning and he would get a call that a patient of his had committed suicide the night before. I'm sure a lot of people have had all sorts of similar type synchronicities. And then F. David Pete, this physicist who used to work with David Bohm, wrote a book, Synchronicity, the Bridge Between Mind and Matter. And he sort of saw that synchronicities seem to represent this bridge between the psychic and the physical, these realms that we previously had seen as separate. And he talked about how they pointed towards a kind of activation of a different level of mind, in a sense. Like, like if you have a synchronistic experience, it's like, it's like this click. It's almost audible. It's like when you have a creative breakthrough or fall in love with somebody. Those are other clicks. And at those points, it's almost like you enter into this higher order, this like flow awareness. So he points to the idea that what religious traditions talk about as the end of time could actually be the shift from our type of time to a time that was much more synchronous, where these synchronistic events were happening continuously all the time. So I wrote the book, and since then I get hundreds of emails from people who are like telling me about their synchronicities and their lives, relationship to the book. And then the message that I've been getting in different psychedelic journeys has been to sort of begin to move from synchronicity to intention. That somehow there's like, it's not enough just to be passively aware or just to be in the flow of synchronicities. We actually have to sort of shift our consciousness to be a little bit more anticipatory about, reality, in a sense. And I mean, I'll tell you like one somewhat humorous, like personal experience where I was interviewed when 2012 came out. Through like a series of strange events, I got profiled by Rolling Stone. And this interviewer spent a lot of time with me, and then she wrote this piece, and I obviously didn't get to read the piece. Then the piece just kept not coming out. And so I ran into a friend of mine who was really into like visualization. She was like, oh, what you have to do is, she gave me these tapes. She's like, you visualize the piece coming out, and it could help. Maybe the piece will come out. It's like a magical practice. So I started like visualizing the piece coming out, and all these people like getting in touch with my ideas through this piece. So then the piece came out, and it was horrible. It was like this total character assassination, and the writer clearly like hated me and hated my ideas. And but the piece came out, and a lot of people got in touch with my ideas. So I went to lunch with a friend of mine, and I was like, Michael, I don't know what went wrong. I did these visualizations. This piece came out, but it was terrible. And he was like, well, when you did your visualizations, did you think about the content of the piece? I was like, no, I never thought about the content of the piece. So in a way, I brought it upon myself. And I think that's like there's a lot of I think these psychic capacities may be really legitimately available to all of us, but we have this kind of protective buffer around activating them, because if we're still not conscious about a lot of our behavior and who we are and so on, if we're still, have a lot of shadow material, we're going to project that, as the psyche becomes more powerful, And, so I think that's something to really worry about. Anyway, so another whole aspect of psychedelics that I wanted to discuss a little bit is this whole entity contact piece. And I guess what interests me is that we could potentially move from where we've been with psychedelics to taking it more seriously. And it seems like it's gone through different phases. Like in the 60s, there was this mass attempt from Leary and so on, and lots of people tried it. Then McKenna's idea was more like, a deeper immersion for a harder core, And now there seems to be a mycelial spread of a kind of underground psychedelic culture around a lot of the world. I don't know what it is number-wise. It seems pretty small, and it's also kind of interesting. Like apparently Amsterdam is not going to sell mushrooms anymore, and they're going to close those stores, and people who get impassioned about the psychedelic experience care so much about it and think that this maybe is the antidote for contemporary life and so on. But it wasn't like people were like flocking to those mushrooms when they were available. They were mostly just like sitting in these like dusty little psychedelic stores. So I don't know what that means exactly, but I think I do think that psychedelics have a potential importance. I think it maybe has to do with the cultural context in which they're presented, and also how people access them. So this idea that we could move into more of a kind of spiritual science approach. And one of the thinkers who was really important for me in my books was Rudolf Steiner. And I recommend that you guys go to visit the Goetheanum, which is near here, and read some of his books. And nobody in the anthroposophical world thinks about psychedelics or believes that they would give you access to any form of intensified consciousness or supersensible awareness. But I think that is probably a mistake on their part, that Steiner himself was a very evolutionary thinker, and if he'd been around, he would have seen that these were necessary catalysts, and he probably would have seen them as luciferic catalysts. Steiner sort of had this idea that there were these different types of beings that were working on humanity all the time, and he took the devil of Christianity, split the devil up into two forces, Lucifer and Ahriman, that he said were working on us all the time. So Lucifer is this force that pulls us like up and out from the earth, and it's like this force of haughtiness and arrogance and brilliance and beauty. It's like romantic poets or the Burning Man Festival or so on. But Lucifer literally means a light bringer. But as you get up and away from the earth, you lose contact. You become arrogant. You get hubris. And so Ahriman is the opposite force that's pulling us down towards minerality, death, extinction, kind of material technology, sterility. And so, Steiner saw this time that we're in now, he foresaw it as being the ascendance of Ahriman, and the kind of Ahrimanic technological impulse would become the main thing. So I think he would have seen the psychedelics in the 60s through today as being like a luciferic catalyst. And he really saw that there was no way that humans could avoid having these forces work upon us. They work upon us all the time. The question is to find the balance in between them, like the healthy balance in between them. So one experience that a lot of people have with psychedelics is this whole realm of entity contact. And it would almost be cool if, along with Erowid about the psychedelic experience, there was a whole nother kind of taxonomy taking place of different types of entities. And the stories that you get from people are so often like amazing and kind of imaginative. And I guess that's another whole way to think about it is like, what is the imagination? Like Blake talked about how like imagination was actually the human reality in itself. And Terence McKenna talked about how the imagination may not just be showing us things that aren't there. It might be more like a lens that allows us to see at like deeper and shallower depths of like the psychocosmos, which could be infinite. So we almost like we need a different approach to the imagination as a kind of tool or lens or something. So I'll just give you one story, then maybe I'll take some questions or comments. If there are going to be comments, I'm going to ask you to keep them brief, and if people start ranting and rampaging, then I'll cut them off meanly, maybe. A friend of mine told me about a story that he had never smoked marijuana. He'd always been really suspicious about marijuana and what it did to people that he knew. He just didn't like the vibe around it. He's somebody who's gone through like occult schools and has all this lucid dream work, and he has power animals. He has a raven, a power animal that he encountered in a dream where he turned into this raven, and it stayed with him ever since. And he said that sometimes when he would see his friends smoke marijuana, this is in the Northwest and around Seattle, so there's a lot of marijuana smoked around there. He would see these little like electrical sparks like around their auras and stuff. So finally, he decided that he would delve into the marijuana experience and try it for himself. But he did a whole ceremony around it. He called in all this protection, and then he smoked marijuana. And he said that he didn't really remember too much about what happened, but the next day he called in his power animal, the raven, and he asked what had happened when he smoked marijuana. And the raven said, "Oh, sure, I'll show you." So the raven showed the raven's view of this experience. And from the raven's perspective, when my friend smoked this marijuana, this kind of these beings appeared, these little green beings, and they began to grab things out of his head, and they began to blow this kind of gray smog or smoke into his skull. And then they would disappear along these little electrical currents into like an astral dimension. And Dana was like, "Well, who are these little green beings?" And they were kind of like elfin in appearance. So the raven said, "Well, do you want to follow them?" So they said, "Sure." So in this sort of visionary recapitulation of the experience, he then took the raven and followed one of these beings through these electrical currents. They ended up in this astral plane, and these beings introduced themselves. There was a ton of them. They had a whole little civilization. They called themselves the Keepers of the Leaf, and they were like the protectors of the marijuana plant on the astral plane. And they explained to him that humanity had once been like a decent species until an event happened which they called the abuse of fire. And at that point, we'd become really haughty, and we'd like lost our connection to all the other species, and we'd become sort of hopeless in a way. And now that they had to sort of deal with our inconsistencies, and because our thoughts were so polluted, and we had all these like weird thoughts and so on, we were actually causing pollution on the astral plane. So what they would do is when they came when we smoked, they would blow the smoke, the pollution back into our heads that we'd created on the astral plane. And because we weren't, and the stuff that they took from our heads is aspects of our free will and our intelligence that we weren't using. So they figured they might as well use it because they could use it properly, and we weren't making any use of it anyway, so why not just grab it? And so they showed him, they had like this Shinto temple architecture that they showed him, and he was very elaborate. He went on and on, So, I don't know, it's just, that kind of experience, I think, comes in psychedelic experiences. I mean, Grant Morrison had a similar type experience in some ways where he's a comic book artist, but he told me this whole story about how he decided that he was very interested to experience the voodoo loa of death, So he created a voodoo ritual, and he ate a little mushroom, and suddenly he found himself on this aspect of the astral plane with all of these scorpion beings. And they explained to him that they were a coterie of assassins on the astral plane, and that they would teach him how to kill. But he would have to keep coming back and do these rituals, and also he would have to get a tattoo of a scorpion, on his arm or something. And he was like, I don't want to learn how to kill. I'm getting out of here. And he says that before he managed to leave their domain, they stung him, So he got a staph infection that no antibiotics would cure, and he was sort of hovering between life and death. He was in the hospital. He said at one point the Gnostic Christ came and visited him, and made him promise that if he was restored to life, he would only do good. He wouldn't be involved with this kind of ambivalent black magic stuff anymore. So he promised. And then finally, he tried to make he was a chaos magician, so he tried to make a bargain with this bacteria that was attacking him. And he said, look, guys, if you let me go and let me live, I'm going to make a comic book about you guys, and I'll make you into this awesome evil villain, So they said, okay, that sounds cool. We've never been a villain in a comic book before. We'll take you up on that. So they let him go, and he made this comic book, The Filth, So stories like that, what are you going to do with them? I mean, are you just going to neglect them as data, or they also, do they have, taken en masse, do they begin to suggest that, there's a lot of other worlds out there and dimensions that we can learn to access and maybe learn how to have more intention around. Okay, so I'll stop there and maybe take a comment. Yeah. Actually, I wanted to invite my friend John Lash up here a little bit, because he's written this book, Not in His Image, about Gnosticism. And I think, I don't know, John, if you want to take the microphone for a little bit, and just maybe you could talk a little bit about your book, and we'll have a few minutes of back and forth. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Daniel. It's a great privilege to be here. And I was just going over the many, many things that you said, and of course there's a vast spectrum of possibilities that you outlined for us that are connected with the psychedelic experience. And the one word, the one thing that stuck most to my mind and that resonated for me was the idea of intention. How can we be intentional? And as you know, this is largely a subject of my book. I always carry my book with me. It was a very heavy book, and I use it against Vatican assassins and people like that who tend to attack me.
Can I briefly explain the subject of the book, Not in His Image?
The book is about Gnosticism as a form of shamanism, and the Gnostic practice, to me, seems to offer a response to what Daniel was saying. I think that it would be safe to say that the one thing that we all have in common here is that we either are visionaries or we're considering becoming visionaries. That's why we're all here. And so that's a huge decision to make in anyone's life, obviously. And then after that, let's say that you decide to become a visionary, if you haven't already. Then after that comes another decision. and you've also alluded to this in a number of the experiences that you've described, Daniel, and that is the decision that I would express by using a phrase from the Grail legend. You know, the legend of Parsifal and the Holy Grail is the central guiding spiritual myth of Europe. And in that particular story, there is a thing called the Grail question. Rudolf Steiner was very involved with this as well, as you know, Daniel. And the Grail question is that when Parsifal, the young knight, rather by a stumble-bum method, because he didn't really know he was going to find the Grail, found himself in front of this numinous object, which I would say is a symbol of the mystic or psychedelic experience, he blew it the first time. He had 2 meetings with the Grail, and the first time he blew it because he did not ask a certain question. And then the whole story of Parsifal is about how he finally found his way back to the Grail later on, and this time he asked the question. And what was the question that Parsifal asked to the Grail? That is, not to a person, not to a god, but to the experience, the psychedelic experience. He said, "Whom do you serve?" And so I think that that question is very, very helpful, because when we consider all the possibilities that Daniel's been describing and that we've encountered in this conference, enormous possibilities where we can go with the psychedelic experience, or experimental mysticism, as I like to call it, and how we can connect these things, there is for me one central question. Well, who do you serve with your psychedelic experience? Suppose you have that experience, and if it's only for recreation or it's only for exploring your own mind, well, that may be valuable. I'm not invalidating that, but I'm putting into your minds the question that your psychedelic experience could be in the service of something other than you, and also other than the pure act of exploration and discovery, which is, of course, wonderful, and it will always be that. And so, very briefly, I don't want to take any more time, just 2 more minutes. I want to say that in this book, I recovered some of the lost mystical knowledge of the Gnostics and of the pagan wisdom tradition of Europe. And it's my understanding that in their practice of visionary trance, they dedicated and aimed their practice to Gaia. And it's very interesting that this event is put on by Gaia Media, and I'm very grateful to Dieter and all those people, but we don't hear the word Gaia mentioned very often in these discourses. So what I'm curious about, and what I'd like to open up a dialogue on, as you know, Daniel, is there a possibility that some of us visionaries and mystics of the future might systematically and intentionally be developing a communication with the planet, with the goddess that we inhabit? And that could be perhaps one direction to take the psychedelic experience in the future.
What really excited me about John's book was a number of things, but one was this idea that Gnosticism, which we tend to think of as a heretical sect in Christianity, might have actually been the holder of this ancient kind of mystery knowledge of the West, very similar to what we've now encountering in these indigenous shamanic traditions. And among the things that he puts forth is the idea that the Gnostics in the early Christian era, they kind of recognized that Christianity was a deviation from a kind of proper development path for humanity. And they tried to raise the alarm at that point, and for that they were harassed and purged and burned at the stake and so on. I don't know, the book just struck a lot of resonant chords with me. And that's, what I open up, if anybody wants to tangle with this material, is that, according to this Gnostic perspective, there are other beings who are connected with our human reality, and some of them are decent, some of them don't give a hoot about who we are, some of them also are malevolent from our perspective. And so the Gnostics have this whole thing about these beings called the archons, which I think John Lash gives some convincing perspective on, could be very similar to the kind of UFO gray alien beings that are, seem to be in the collective imagination and in the popular imagination. And also there are continual sightings of them, and so on. So open that up if anybody wants to talk about that. Anybody have a comment or question or anything like that? Okay, you want to take a mic? Take the mic.
Yeah, I just want to thank you, and thank you also for your comments and the book you've written there too. I think it's very interesting that you bring a lot of different elements to the experience here. It's not just about the drugs, it's not just about this or that. There are tools to reconnect ourselves with Gaia, with the earth, and you know, that's what brings me here too. And in fact, I started out my journey at the Ecclesia Gnostica with Bishop Hulla.
Stephen Hulla, I know.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And I have a few friends there. And so I started myself out with the Gnostic tradition as well. And so that's interesting that this fits in there, and it certainly does. And there's also this element of Gnostic element that's in all mystic traditions. This idea that our individual bodies, our biological beings, are connected to a greater unitary energy that everything is shared and a part of. And you know, a lot of my experiences, both mystic visions without any sort of substances, in fact, most of mine are, but also with, I've, you know, come in contact with certain entities also like this. You know, this is kind of weird to share with a lot of people, but it seems like this is the right place to share such information. You know, and I'm a pretty grounded individual. I was in the Air Force, you know, and took orders, and I know how to march left, right, left, right. The whole point is, and I don't think I'm crazy, and the information that I've been shared with from other entities has actually been useful in my life and has brought me, you know, to practical steps towards achieving some of the different things that are for me and for the rest of the world to share. So I just want to really thank you for, you know, putting yourself out and doing what you're doing. And I really want to emphasize also your idea of intention, because our thoughts, as Carl Jung has put into some of his works, and which is really important and key in Gnosticism. Carl Jung and Hulla were like this, as you know. You know, these ideas that we have in our minds actually come into fruition. Everything that we see around us first came in because a person had an idea. You know, the very ground that we walk on was formed because someone had an idea of forming it. And so if we wanted to make a new world, if we wanted to make that world that I've seen in certain visions and stuff like that, and which others have as well, we must start by each having the individual dream. So each individual must make that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a friend who's a MIT nanotechnologist who's done these things with carbon nanotubes, where he makes these like sacred geometry patterns that are on the cover of science magazines, and he believes that they could, you know, they've gotten them to scale up like exponentially, and ultimately they could become buildings. Like you could be, you know, taking in carbon from the atmosphere and making these buildings out of any form. And, you know, I've asked him, you know, what he thinks the future holds, and he says he and his scientist friends joke about or talk about ITM, instantaneous thought manifestation, you know, where, you know, and so for him, technology is not the enemy. It's also a profound tool that, you know, kind of would potentially work with our psychic capabilities and capacities, where we might have, you know, abilities to manifest on a level. And I think if we look at just, you know, where we're at technologically, it does seem as though the amount of time between like thought and manifestation, because of the technology, keeps getting faster and faster. You know, like Michelangelo, you know, wanted to do a statue. He'd have had to like find the stone, you know, learn how to be a great stone carver, carve it out. You know, now potentially somebody could get an AutoCAD program, design something, have manufactured out of plastic or something, right away. So I think there's this amazing acceleration in the small, the gap decreasing between thought and manifestation on so many levels, and it just seems to be an extraordinary aspect of our moment. Go ahead, yeah, just stand up at the mic and.
Hi, Daniel.
Stand behind him, because otherwise I'll lose your comment or whatever. If you want.
I'm here to give you a hard time today.
Yeah, cool.
To some of us who are in the audience who hear these grand tales about entities, being, presences, and all these things, and have various sorts of skeptical mindsets about them, how do you feel about some people, such as myself, who interpret these visionary experiences as essentially manifestations of the subconscious, and that when you use DMT or meditation or however you're using to achieve a visionary state, what you're essentially getting is an anthropomorphic version of what deep down you and yourself would like to believe, but maybe because you wake up in the morning, you go to the job, you get home and watch TV, it's that when you drop into these states is when you're getting these beings who are teaching you things. And instead of coming from another dimension or another reality, they're coming from inside yourself. Do you think people with those sorts of viewpoints, do you think it matters whether you consider that these are actual beings and sentient entities that are somewhere else in the universe, in other dimensions or things like that, or something that comes from inside yourself? Because I don't think there's anyone in the Western world who doesn't understand at some subconscious level that humanity has done great harm to the earth and is in the process of doing it, and we need to do things to correct that in our own best interest. It's not this incredible epiphany that you need a being from outer space or another dimension to tell you.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that it's good to preserve skepticism, and I'm presenting this as data, but I'm also trying to maintain my own skepticism for my own experiences. But I think that there's a problem with the way people utilize skepticism, and I tried to address this in the book. When most people say they're skeptical, they're actually, what they really mean is they're believers, generally, they're believers in skepticism. That they have taken the secular materialist perspective, and nothing's going to shake them from that. So I would say that a more strict skepticism would just to be open. Maybe that's the case. I mean, I feel like I've had experiences even of physical manifestations. I mean, I had this crazy experience where I was having an ayahuasca trip where the whole thing was about the cosmic serpent and writer's block, which I was experiencing then. And I went out after the trip and pulled this pen from a tree that was a pewter pen of a cobra that seemed to be like an answer to the whole paradox that I'd set myself. And I don't know how that could have arrived there. I mean, I've had other experiences like that I talk about because they happened to me, and I think those kind of things happen to other people too. So to me it feels more probable that there is a kind of trickster domain of other entities who exist in a different type of time-space continuum that we don't understand than that it's all subconscious material projected. But I could be wrong.
Thank you for providing a beautiful gateway to what it is that I felt to say, which is, what if we were all to actually right now, not in 2012, but right now enter into this receptive space? So I also don't want to just kind of reduce it to a feminist thing, but I think it's amazing that out of 72 or however many speakers, there were 14 or however many women. And speaking of Gaia, and what would happen if we didn't differentiate, if we just allowed ourselves to enter into this receptive space where we were really open and allowed ourselves to really, truly, right now, embody everything that we do know. And if it weren't about speeding up, I really don't feel like going faster. I'm totally overwhelmed already. And I've just begun. So, I'm pretty young. So I don't particularly feel that that's a necessarily useful paradigm to operate under, that things are going to continuously speed up. But what if rather we were here now already, and we are part of this morphogenetic field. We've been pulling each other up collectively by our bootstraps. We know what's going on. And so I guess my question or my hope would be that just for one moment, maybe even just right now, we could each of us take 30 seconds to consider what's one way we could open, be receptive, and embrace that receptivity within each of us, so that there isn't really a question of what's out there and what's in here, what's Gaia and what's not, what's alien.
But I personally prefer, like, it's a great idea for people to do on their own, but
sure.
I always feel it's a little bit like an imposition when you
totally, fair enough. But just, that's actually great. Thank you. Thank you. But just to put it out there as an option, right? Thanks.
Well, Daniel, thank you for your talk. Very interesting, and thanks for sort of opening up this forum. Obviously, we're already having an interesting discussion here, and those of you who have seen my talk realize I've never hesitated to add my 2 cents worth. So I guess I will. I don't want to dominate, the time that's left, but I want to make a couple of observations. What the gentleman here said about, the visionaries, the mystics, and so on are kind of opening up channels to the alien entities or some transdimensional source of gnosis and understanding. Maybe, or they may be opening it up to us. Again, I think it's important to remember that, we're only monkeys and we don't know very much. So that's probably the chief lesson right there. We don't know much. We think we know a lot, but we do know a lot, but there's a whole lot more that we don't know. So we have to remember that. We have to keep that perspective. Lest we become arrogant.
Why was Socrates the wisest man in Athens?
Because he asked a lot of questions and he said he didn't know anything.
Yeah, exactly. According to the Delphic Oracle, he alone knew that he did not know.
Right. That's the beginning of true, you open yourself up to the possibility of learning once you say, I don't know anything. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if that's what Socrates said exactly, but that was the gist of it, And then, so that's important to remember, I think. We're all learners here, and we're all pretty ignorant of what's going on. And what that gentleman over there said about ideas, I was really struck by that. Yes, we're immersed in a world of ideas. This is what separates us from everybody else and even the other primates. Even though we're primates, we live in a world of symbols and thought and ideas, and we can visualize things and make them happen. We can visualize carbon nanotubes and make them happen. Oh, by the way, just as an aside, I'm starting a nanotechnology company. It's going to be called IBM, which stands for itty bitty machines. But that's neither here nor there, and investors are being interviewed. But that's important because ideas have always been what's led sort of humanity's curiosity and progress and understanding of the world ever since we've been capable of having ideas. And I think there's quite a bit of evidence that our early use of psychedelic plants may have triggered that process, our abilities to link symbol and sound, for example, which is the basis of language. So ideas are really important, and there are lots of them out there, lots of ideas. Some have a great deal of merit, and some are total bullshit. And we have to be very careful. I think another thing that, and there are many people out there that are willing to say, we have the truth, we have the ideas, and you should get on board with, our trip, whatever that trip may be, religious, philosophical, political, or whatever. one of the things that humans, one of the traits that we exhibit that I think is important is our critical faculties. And that's different than skepticism. You know, we should be skeptical of even skepticism. You know, we should make sure that our critical faculties, our ability to question authority, to question ideas, concepts, and so on, remain intact at all times, even with what the psychedelics say to us, perhaps especially with what the psychedelics say to us. You know, since what they're saying to us are some pretty bizarre things sometimes. So we should question all that and test that. And, you know, we were talking about this yesterday. You know, these entities come around and make these assertions and hand down the gospel from on high. Do they actually ever tell you anything you can't possibly know? I mean, this goes back to your remark. You know, is this another aspect of the unconscious? You take DMT and come to the conclusion that yes, it is. There are no entities out there. Somebody else may say, well, there are entities, definitely. But badger them, make them tell you something you don't know. You know, I mean, if this is a learning process, press them. And press yourself, but mostly keep an open mind, but not so open that you abandon your critical faculties. I guess that's my point. Thank you.
Okay, hello. First, thanks for your very inspirational ideas and speeches. And I would like to make a comment on your words on skepticism. I think that skepticism is a very good thing, and I try to be very skeptical on everything all the time, but I also think that, for example, if I have an experience where aliens that are red and they got dicks in their foreheads and they tell me that the only way for humanity to survive is to connect with this planet, for example, it doesn't matter if these entities are real anywhere else than in my mind. What matters is if the things they're telling me seem to work out, seem to be working, then probably I should listen to them. And although it's very good to be skeptical, it's also very easy to get stuck into just being skeptical and not paying attention to the message. So whether these entities exist or not, it's not the point. The point is, if something works, then let's use it. And also,
okay.
Well, maybe I'll not go on more.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, in 2012, I did a whole study of the crop circles, and, you know, I spent 2 summers in England and interviewed all these researchers, and ended up feeling there was significant evidence that pointed towards them not being human constructs, you know, which then means that they're constructed by somebody else. And, you know, there does seem to be, like, people have extracted different types of information and knowledge from them. They're also very beautiful. They use a lot of sacred geometry. They use a lot of fractals and so on. And also, when you go into the crop circle phenomenon, you start having a lot of synchronicities. Like when you enter a new crop circle, there's like this energetic shift. You know, they're kind of like a psychedelic phenomenon in total. And one thing that I began to think about, you know, higher intelligence or galactic intelligence or other forms of being or something, is, you know, it's our kind of prejudice and maybe our naivete to think that like a higher form of intelligence would be, you know, super interested in giving us like specific knowledge or technology or, you know, some kind of clue. Like when I talked to the guy from SETI about the crop circles, he was like, well, you know, if they're for real, you know, they should just leave an Encyclopedia Galactica on our doorstep, you know. And I was like, well, you know, maybe that's not how they want to communicate. And then the more I thought about it, I was like, well, you know, if I think about my world, like higher intelligence, yeah, science, but also, you know, art and culture, like, you know, Bach and Marcel Duchamp and, you know, Shakespeare, you know. So what if like encountering any form of alien intelligence or alien consciousness, it's going to be like meeting like some awesome futuristic conceptual artist, you know, who's going to, and you have to understand the kind of bounded discourse of their art projects, you know, before you can even begin to be in some kind of interaction. You know, so maybe art, you know, rather than science is an interesting model to think about, how higher intelligence might want to communicate with us, if they found us interesting.
I also wanted to add that one thing I think this world really needs are people who are brave enough to just put out theories, like, for example, you and Terence McKenna. So it doesn't really matter if an idea seems to be wild at first. Just put out the idea and let people criticize it, and then maybe you create something unique and something that will really help us in where we are. I think like most of the best ideas have been created in that way. So we need to be brave and not like the skepticism overshadow our creativity.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fun to kind of demand the impossible, and actually, if you look at the U.S., it's worked for the right wing, like the neoconservatives have demanded the impossible, and now they've kind of gotten it, it's like, they pulled the discourse so far into their, psychotropic madness that, like if you read Naomi Klein's The Shock Doctrine, now they're like, they anticipate destruction so that they can recolonize, their own cities and so on like that, and create these privatized projects, So in a way, I think like, that's kind of in a way like I feel my trickster fun role at an event like this is, I can throw stuff out there because I'm not claiming to be an expert or a scientist. It's like let's see where we can go. Like let's play with ideas. Let's push it around a little bit. And maybe I don't know. Maybe if we demand the impossible, we'll even get it. You never know.
Hi. 2 quick questions for you, if I may. The first one is, are you thinking of doing anything yourself, especially on 2012 for commemoration, if I can put it so bluntly? Going to Mexico at a Mayan temple on an auspicious date and consuming something? That's just a quickie thought. The next one is a bit more serious, and that is, in your experiences with shamans who are promoting the forgotten concept here of respecting your ancestors and calling upon them for wisdom, have you come across discourses or advocations from their side as what you or they might be doing to prepare themselves to become good ancestors in the future? Because they have to come from somewhere.
Good ancestors in the future. I don't know. I don't know how to answer the second one. The first question, I don't really think ahead that much. I'm not a very good planner, so we'll just see what happens. I don't know. I mean, maybe I'll have like pie on my face at that point. People will be so sick of the whole 2012 thing. I'll have to hide in a ditch somewhere or something. I don't know. But what's that? What do you say? What's that?
The day after you'll have pie on your face the day after.
The day after, right? Yeah. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. But I think what I really keep saying in the work over and over again is I don't think we should focus on that date at all. It's more like we're in a planetary emergency right now. Like we're looking at the climate crisis, and as I said in the video we played before, the species extinction crisis, everything's being privatized. The RFID chips are coming. We're like people in a burning building, and we spend too much of our time thinking about the drapes or cleaning the furniture, when we really better be like finding the fire escape and getting the hell out. So then that for me is like, I talked to this left forum. And I was like, look, I think that this, Web 2.0 technology is awesome as a tool of social transformation. Where some of them are like, technology, that's not going to help us. It's like, look, if it's a tool, if it's a ladder that can get us out of the burning building, let's use the ladder. Then later on, maybe we don't even want the ladder. We'll do something else. But at the moment, I think we really have to look at our situation, with a certain level of urgency, but hopefully not panic. And also another thing, I was just at this 2012 conference, and people were saying you shouldn't fear, you should overcome your fear. And I don't know, I began to have a sort of resistance to that, because I was like, I don't think you should be swarmed by your fear or overwhelmed by fear, but I think fear and worry are kind of natural immune responses of our human emotional system. And if we're scared of something, we should begin to take heed of that fear, and not become. I think we get paralyzed and panicked, and that's obviously not good. But the fear about the future is telling us something, and if we focus on, not a different intentionalizing of our possibilities, you know, maybe we can stop having that stupid fear, you know.
Hi, Daniel. I was just wondering how you feel about Jose Arguelles' work, and especially whether or not you feel that it's a good tool for us to explore this non-linear aspect of time, his dream spell, his adaptation of the Mayan calendar. You think that's a good shamanic tool for familiarizing ourselves with radial time and how that might help us in transition?
So, I mean, in 2012, I go into Arguelles' work in depth and the dream spell. You know, at first I was very impressed, and I thought it was brilliant, just the idea that, you know, changing the calendar, like, you know, is an amazing concept. You know, like, we don't think that's, you know, we once again, we forget that time is this construct, and the Gregorian calendar is really sucky. You know, like it gives us 12 months of unequal days that have nothing to do with lunar cycles. So we're not, what are we measuring with the Gregorian calendar? We're measuring, you know, Julian and Augustus, you know, we're commemorating the Caesars, and we're you know, holding ourselves in this totally arbitrary kind of time frequency. So I thought his idea of creating a more harmonic time frequency was a great idea. But then when I analyzed his system in more depth, it doesn't really seem to do the job, because he actually abstracts. If the Gregorian calendar, if the 12-month calendar is kind of a solar abstraction, the 1328 thing is a kind of lunar abstraction. And actually, you have to do more work to really create a proper, technically appropriate scientific instrument. It seems like there are ways that he misunderstood the Mayan calendar from that point of time. So I don't know. I have some friends who swear by it, and I've had interesting experiences with it. I guess, you know, since it's so based on the lunar thing, I would wonder if the solar calendar of the Gregorian kind of keeps us in this kind of alienated, abstract rationality. It may be that Arguelles' calendar pulls us a little bit far into like lunar, you know, kind of intuitive, magical thinking, and you know, people who seem to get into his calendar seem to get a little bit lost in those systems. You know, the vibe around it doesn't feel fully healthy to me. You know, but I think that I really like, and I talked about it in 2012, the idea that if we were going to go through some major global social transformation, that a marker of that might be like a new timing frequency on a global scale, and that could actually be an opportunity to bring together like shamans, scientists, you know, wisdom holders from different traditions, and work out one that was both good for the mystics and good for the scientists. But I don't think that one is it, you know. But it was a genius idea to go forward with that project.
Hi, Daniel. I'm also another woman. Never mind. I wanted to thank you for your book, because it was my first introduction to something I had been dreaming about for some years. And what was cool about it was that it put a date to it. And so to speak, it put a date to the becoming of my dream. And but one thing I wanted to say was that actually this dream is already happening. And I read another book, and I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's by Dr. Kaleman, called The Transformation of Consciousness. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to recommend it to those of you who haven't read it, because as time accelerates, and it is going to accelerate, it is accelerating now, no matter how much we want it or not. He also, to this time crunch, by studying the past and what the Mayan calendar was able to predict in the past, what it's going to mean in the future in the next 4 years. And one of the interesting things he said was that in order for a new paradigm to come into being, everything that we know has to sort of be destroyed in order for something old to disappear. Something new has to be born. And I would recommend everybody sort of to read it if they're curious about how this is going to come about. Obviously, in the end, our subjective minds are also going to be influencing how we experience this, but I would think it's fair reading. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I discussed the Kaleman book in 2012, and I find it interesting. I mean, he talks about this year being the Tezcatlipoca year, and that there was going to be, you know, Great Depression and, you know, military outbursts and so on. You know, so it's interesting that we're seeing like the cratering of the U.S. economy at this point. in relationship to that system. I also like John Major Jenkins, whose scholarship on the December 21st, 2012 date seems like the best from what I understand. He's very critical of Kalaman and sees it more kind of arbitrary in his way of using the Mayan calendar. But it's interesting. So Kalaman creates this whole pyramid with this exponential speed up. I can't go into the whole thing. Check it out. It's cool.
Oh, thanks again, of course. I have a short comment, but mainly a question. I don't think we can have pie on our face because it's a certain amount of hubris to think that we would even know that something happened on December 21st because somebody might be in their garage having invented a time machine that we wouldn't know about for 20 or 30 years. And as Terence said, that would make calendars obsolete. It wouldn't be immediately obvious. But secondly, I have a 13-year-old son. His father works for Saudi Aramco in Saudi Arabia, so we have definite paradigm conflicts. And he wants to take my son, and once he gets into Saudi Arabia, I couldn't even go over there and get him. They wouldn't let me in, and the son totally belongs to the father once they go over there. So he's here. I've brought him here. Of course, I haven't given him any drugs, but I certainly want to give him an experience, and he's held your book, and I'm wondering, what do you think, how do you think I can tell him? What should I tell him?
About what?
About 2012. How do you, what should I say, you know, that's authentic and yet safe? You know, I don't want him to go, his father already knows I've taken him.
You know, I think that he's probably sensitized to this, you know,
he
being
has
a
questions.
time of transformation.
He has
Nobody
real
knows what's
questions.
going to happen. And, you know, as I said, I don't really believe in putting any particular stake in that date. So, you know, just make him aware that we're in a time of change and, you know, crisis and transformation, and the climate is changing. You know, I actually really love Buckminster Fuller had this neat point that children are elders in universe time because they come into being in an older universe. I think that's a really nice way of looking at it.
Well, he
I
knows
feel that way with my daughter.
He'll be
very
18, and he goes, "What do you think I should be doing?" And it's just it's an awesome question, really.
Yeah. Well, I mean. Hopefully he'll be having the best life ever. You know?
Yeah, that'd be good. Thanks
And I
again.
also think, like, so once again, like in terms of the projections around 2012, I mean, you know, like even somebody like Alberto Vallaldo, who I think is really magnificent, and he has this whole shamanic school, the Four Winds. I mean, he has put out the idea that, you know, 2/3 of the population may not survive this transition or whatever. And I really find that sad to even consider. And I also feel that since we don't know what's going to happen, you know, I just fear the consequences of even lingering in that kind of awareness, because potentially if you know, society became rational today or tomorrow, we began to allocate resources naturally, we, you know, took the amassed wealth from the totally too wealthy and distributed it to some of the many billions of people who need it, you know, we wouldn't have to go through a, you know, cataclysmic process. So, you know, maybe it won't be like that kind of thing. You know, maybe it'll be more like a gentle process, like this awareness could, I mean, like the Berlin Wall falling in 1989. Nobody had predicted that could happen, but just the awareness of people had reached the point where they couldn't have that wall around anymore. You know, so maybe on a lot of levels, people are reaching a deeper awareness that they can't have, even though it's like subliminal, like barely expressed awareness. And so maybe the whole thing can happen in a totally different, gentler, and more positive way than we can even imagine. You know?
Hi. Talk about good synchronicities. I train with the Four Winds, but I actually diverge with Alberto about time to come. What I wanted to do is to make an observation and also a suggestion, which is that seems to me one of the threads that's running through this discussion is how to archetypically engage with the time to come, whether it's the next 4 years or, you know, the planetary time to come or the personal time to come. And the suggestion is that, you know, each person has their own archetype that's useful to them, whether it's to be the critical observer or, you know, to engage with it as a spiritual crisis or a planetary emergency. But the suggestion would be that perhaps the most useful way to engage with it is as an archetype of personal growth
and personal growth specifically into ever more expansive states of feeling and being, specifically with regards to love. And I don't mean romantic love, but more the kind of divine love, the unconditional love that glues everything in the cosmos together.
Thanks.
Hello, I'd like to make a radical suggestion about the nature of our moment right now, which is possibly very psychedelic in itself. The fact that we're here, we don't really know much, any of us, given how many hairs are on our head, you know, our heart rate, where the wood for the floor came, how much electricity the building is consuming. There's just the vastness of what we don't know kind of makes us all equal in our, I dare say, idiocy, you know, and then our presumption to say that we know what is normal, what is to be done, and what we're doing. And in fact, we're experiencing the psychedelic at the moment. This is the psychedelic experience, and when we move into it, we'll be experiencing the psychedelic moment like it's degrees of the same thing, and we're already there. So it is a matter of our intention and looking at where we want to go with the magic that is our existence right now, and not being inhibited by limits, I would say, seeing as how it's all undescribable. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Oh, down in the circle. Okay. Which one? Circle.
Should I say that?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Okay, cool. We're going to stop here. Thank you very much. We're going to go downstairs, and we can chat more if you want to come chat. Yeah.